From the towering Wasatch Mountains of the American Southwest, we welcome you to this episode of Undiscovered Utah. This show focuses on the mysteries that surround the rugged, difficult, and sometimes deadly American Southwest. I'm your host, JB, and tonight I'm going to share with you the fascinating story of Joseph Junior Hicks and the Uinta Basin. Do you know who Joseph Junior Hicks is and what he is known for? Well, this is going to be a wild ride. So gather the family around the old Alexa and let's get started. Joseph Junior Hicks was born in 1927 in Cedar View, Utah. For most of his life, he went by the name of Junior, and so that is how I will refer to him from this point on. When Junior was a young boy, he was full of curiosity. This curiosity served him well his entire life. Junior graduated from Roosevelt High School in 1945, after which he immediately enlisted in the U.S. Navy and served on the USS Protector. In 1947, Junior attended Brigham Young University and received his bachelor's degree in secondary education with a minor in physics and science. He taught at Altera High School and West Junior High for 33 years and became well known for his display of electronic gadgets, minerals, fossils, and other biological specimens on display in his classroom. Junior also created a side business as an electrical contractor in the Uinta Basin and provided services to many in the basin. Junior also earned his pilot's license and bought his own plane by selling a uranium claim he had in southern Utah. Junior loved to go prospecting for gold and silver. He loved to spend time up in the Uinta Mountains looking for old Spanish mines. He also loved astronomy, lapidary, fossils, petroglyphs, Native American history, and of course the local lore of the Uinta Basin. He was well loved in the community by all groups of people, including the indigenous people in the area. At the age of 92 years old, Junior Hicks passed away in his home in Roosevelt, Utah, in the summer of 2020. Throughout Junior's life, he had a fascination with UFOs and other unexplained phenomena. For many decades, and maybe even longer, the Uinta Basin has been a UFO hotspot and also a place for many other really odd things. Junior was intrigued by all the stories, and due to his healthy curiosity, he decided to create a history of people's sightings in the area. Over the years, Junior collected over 400 detailed reports of UFO sightings. And it is Junior's reports that we are going to be talking about tonight. It must be mentioned that Dr. Frank B. Salisbury worked with Junior Hicks on and off from 1966 until 2009 and published a book called The Utah UFO Display that has been updated many times over the years. The first publication was in 1974, and the most recent that I am aware of was in 2010. If this episode of Undiscovered Utah is of interest to you, I would highly recommend this book. You can find it on Amazon and in other fine bookshops. As mentioned in the book, The UFO Display, it was not common for residents in the Uinta Basin to report their sightings to the local authorities or to each other for that fact. Instead, they told their friend and local science expert, Junior Hicks. The following stories are told in the first person. The voices you will hear are not the actual voices of the individuals, but used only for dramatization purposes. The first story is The Justice of the Peace.
My name is Kay Stratton. I was the local justice of the peace at the time of this report. In the summer of 1967, my wife and I had seen a red ball as big as a car sitting on the crest of a hill near a large TV transmitting antenna south of Duchesne. After we stopped, we watched it for a while. The object then went straight up or towards the south until it was out of sight. It was as bright as a neon sign.
The next story comes from Officer Bernard Hayden.
I'm Officer Bernard Haddon. I was deputy sheriff at the time of this report. In the fall of 1966, I saw a brilliant light in the heavens up at an angle of about 45 degrees. I watched with my binoculars. It seemed to be of considerable size, but it did not exhibit a distinct shape, more of a glow, you might say. It appeared to be a mile or two away. It was interesting because of its maneuver seeming to come toward me, then change directions, disappear, and then come back into sight, and finally go straight line from east to west. It didn't seem to have any response to gravity at all.
Dean Powell shared the next report.
I was delivering mail for the main office in Duchesne to a smaller office in Hanna on the North Fork of the Duchesne River. It was June, probably 1966. About 10:15 in the morning, I was leaning on my truck waiting for the postmistress, Miss Crystal Hackett, when I noticed a silver craft hovering in front of a nearby hill across the river. It was perfectly silent. I called Mrs. Hackett, and she came out and saw the object, but immediately ran to get her children so they could see it. When she returned, the object had moved to the north. I could still see it, but I wasn't sure that the others could see it. It was not a flying saucer, but a real flying craft that they are keeping a secret in this country.
It's obvious that Mr. Powell didn't believe in UFOs, but had seen something unidentified flying in the sky. He assumed it was a secret government project that he was witnessing. Our next story is from Kent, Denver.
It was about midnight, and I was driving in the desert with my fiancée, now my wife, and her little brother. Coming around the turn, we saw a very large object that looked like a bowling pin, but with windows all around the top. As our headlights swung toward it, it lifted up with a red flame out the bottom. But the flame was there only when the object was hovering. It would go out and the object would move upwards. Hovering again, the flame appeared. It finally shot upwards.
Well, that's some pretty credible reports from some pretty credible people. This next one is one of my favorite stories. It's from Donna and Valda Massey.
I had just finished canning tomato juice. It was around 11:30 on September 7th. I went to talk to my husband, who had just gone to bed. On the way, I noticed an odd red light in the west. On my way back, I went into the utility room for a better look. The light was moving slowly, perhaps about 5 miles an hour, just above the treetops about a mile away. It was in front of a range of low hills. Soon it became evident that I was watching a large machine, as big as a house. I noticed the strange red beam, this time going in horizontal direction. The machine was round, oval shape. Then there was a yellow light that had tinges of blues and greens and whatnot in it. The yellow light also acted like the red beam. The machine landed on a knoll about a mile from our home. It just came down real soft and just sat there. Garth Batty, a close friend and a local Mormon bishop, arrived in time to watch the object, which remained on the knoll for about an hour. We decided to leave our home and drive towards the object. When we did this, the object moved vertically so rapidly that it just vanished. Then, about 3 nights later, the machine appeared again, following the same pattern of cruising above the treetops and landing on a knoll. This time, the dome light was much brighter, dimming after a few moments to its previous intensity. The object stayed around until everyone finally went to bed. None of us saw it leave this time. A few nights later, we saw a big, huge yellow light. It looked like you could take your arms and just gather it all in. You could just hold it right in your hands. It didn't shoot out any rays from it, and it was different type of light from what our lights are. I ran inside and called Bishop Batty again, but while I was gone, the object left at a high rate of speed. My husband and daughter were still watching it. It was clear over Jensen, and the light went out. The next time we picked it up, it was over Red Wash.
The way these people tell these encounters is just so matter of fact. Our next story comes from James Cooch.
On September 15th at about 2 p.m., I saw a large silvery metallic object hovering some 5 feet off the ground in a clearing in the woods only a few hundred feet behind my house. I walked within 100 feet or so, at which time the object began to rise vertically, spinning slowly and then more rapidly as it rose.
The next report comes from Priscilla, and I hope I'm saying this last name correctly, Sarich.
We were at our home in Randulet watching TV in the living room. At about 8:30, the room began to light up with a red color, so bright we could see each other's faces and the lights were all turned off. We ran outside in time to see a large object flat on the bottom with the dome on the top, hovering above our house, almost appearing to balance on top of the house. It was twice as large as our small home. We could hear a humming noise, and lights around the bottom edge of the object were blinking off and on, giving a predominantly red impression, but also at times appearing to be green and yellow. It was too bright. Every time we looked at it, it kind of hurt our eyes. The object moved east from the house rather rapidly, about a quarter of a mile. Then it came back over our house. It finally disappeared over the horizon to the southwest.
Now remember the name of that town, Randlet, because you're going to hear a lot of sightings around that area. The next story comes from Joanne Harris.
My husband and I live in Randlet, Utah, about 15 miles south of Fort Duchesne. I was driving some girls home after a trip to Roosevelt. As we rounded a turn south of Fort Duchesne, we saw a big, bright light just below the ridge at about treetop level. It started to move towards us, and as it got closer, we could see that there was a large dome, which was flashing yellow color. When the light was on, the object was stationary. It would go out, and when it came back on, the object was much closer. When the light was out, we could see a flat bottom that extended out on either side. I thought it was a big bomber or something about to crash into us, or an Air Force experiment. I expected to see the Air Force boys in the dome grinning at the trick they were playing on us. It got within 30 to 50 feet and filled the windshield of the car. It was as big as the chapel in Ramlet. The girls were trying to get on the floor in the back seat of the car, and the other woman in the car with me was trying to get on the floor in the front seat. I had stopped the car and started to back down the highway when another car came around the bend in the road behind us. As I looked back to the front of the car, the object was gone.
Now, this next story happened the same night, and it's a report from Estelle Manwaring. Estelle and Joanne were friends that had taken a group of girls to a ball game in Roosevelt. Joanne took most of the girls home along with another woman, the one that was trying to get on the floor in the front seat of the car. Estelle took one girl home that lived in Vernal. This is Estelle's account of what they saw the same night as Joanne's encounter.
I had been to Roosevelt at a girls' ball game. After the game, I said I would take one of the girls home that lived in Vernal. We were headed east on Highway 40, and I was following Joanne Harris's car. Joanne turned off the road at Fort Duchesne towards Randlet, and we kept driving towards Vernal. As we came up the hill just east of Fort Duchesne, the girl who was with me noticed a yellow light just above the trees to the south. There was a large house along the otherwise deserted highway, and I pulled into the driveway to get a better look at the object. When I pulled out from the trees, then apparently it was watching me as we were watching it, and it went up very rapidly, straight up. I never heard a sound at all. It was about the size of a small house with a dome on top that was lit up and flashing on and off. There were extremely bright lights around the bottom, but the lights were so bright that it was hard to make out the shape of the bottom. And it went up so fast that our heads just moved back on our necks. Now my windshield slopes and the lights changed underneath it with a glowing, it looked like a glowing, burning thing as it went up, sort of a bluish, reddish color. It looked like kind of a welding torch, a different colored light. It wasn't like car lights or a light in the house.
Our next story comes from Tyrena Daniels, who was a nurse at the hospital in Vernal, and after a long day at work was headed home to Roosevelt, and this was her experience.
My name is Tyrena Daniels. I was a registered nurse at the hospital in Vernal. On the evening of February 27th, I left the hospital a little after 7 p.m. to drive to my home in Roosevelt. I was alone in the car and had just left Vernal driving around a big curve in the road when I noticed a light in a rather particular place off to the right of the highway. It kept getting larger and lower, and I wondered if it was a plane about to crash. It was behind a hill for a moment, And I kept hoping I would see it again, the kind of feeling, because it did give you quite a numbness of a feeling. But as I came right around this little curve, why, here it was, just right here. I wouldn't know how to say how close, about as close as the closest house across the street. But it was raising up. I could see that plainly and coming sort of in the way I was going. Now, it was never out of sight but once from Vernal to Roosevelt. And the one time that it was sort of over me. I felt worse, a little more frightened then than when it was out where I could see it, because I was getting sort of control of myself, as I came along. Sometimes it would be almost directly over the highway, and sometimes it would be a little to the right of the highway, but not too very high. I didn't think that at any time in that almost 30-mile stretch that it was over 3 good treetops high. Now, it looked like a bowl with about a third of the bottom cut off, so it was flat. The drive home took about 45 minutes, with the object in sight virtually all of the time. And I was going at a pretty good speed, too. But I wasn't trying to outrun it or anything. I had control of myself. It was not going to bother me. It had all kinds of chances had it been something wanting to block my passage or use me in any way. It could have done that because there were no cars on the road. In fact, I only encountered one car coming home. They passed me at such a terrific speed, going the same direction, so they had to have seen it. It was a dark maroon-colored car, and it was heavily loaded with people. But I don't know. Now, I tried taking off my glasses. I have to have them to drive. I tried taking them off to see if it would change it, which it didn't. Or the coloring of it. Now, it was an orange as a new risen moon. That color, not exactly orange like an orange. I mean, it looked like a new full moon that wasn't quite up. And then on this bottom part where it was cut across, there were streaks of sometimes a real bright red, sometimes they look blue, and sometimes kind of greenish cast. It looked like, well, you might say, fire. Streaks were like flames, but they didn't go up. They went out, and sometimes they'd go quite a bit further than other times. The flames extended to either side to a distance equal to the width of the object, extending sometimes to the fences on both sides of the road. I came into Roosevelt. A culvert crossed above the highway, and I thought the object might hit it, but it ascended above the culvert and kept ascending until it was almost out of sight. When I pulled into the home, I ran into the house to get my husband, but by then it was only a red-orange light far off to the west. It wasn't imaginary, nohow. That was definitely out. I know I saw it, and I know it was something. It wasn't just a dream or just an imagination. And this one time, it was right up over the car. I didn't feel too good about that. I liked it out there where I could see it. Then I didn't feel scared of it. I just couldn't sleep. You can imagine something like that. I was so against thinking that there were such things. So I sat here just right like I am now. He'd gone to bed and I couldn't go to sleep. So I was sitting here crocheting, and the moon came up over the neighbor's house. And I thought, no, not again. But it looked just like, for a minute, like the moon. and I got almost the same start again. And that was 2 or 3 hours later.
Holy cow, what an account. I would have soiled my britches, I think. Something followed me all the way from Vernal to Roosevelt. This next story comes from Dick Hackford.
I was driving an old truck up to our camp on the mountains. The truck's battery was dead, and we had to push it to get it started. I hadn't drove the truck very much, and I didn't want to stop it because I would have to walk to camp. I was driving this old truck up to the mountains, shifting gears and keeping the truck going, thinking that if I stopped, I'd have to walk to camp. Suddenly, this big ball of light about 200 yards away started moving towards me. It looked about 3 yards in diameter, getting bigger, orange in color. My first thought was about what happened to a horse in Colorado. I didn't want to get shot by any ray gun. I was badly frightened and shaken up. The object moved to within 30 to 40 feet, lighting up the ground. I was busy trying to keep the truck going. The light began to change color to a fluorescent blue and settled directly over the truck. I thought, well, my next bet will be around one of these curves. That will be my destiny. When it came over me, it was right on top of me, and the quaking aspens just brightened up. And they were lots brighter than the old truck lights. I was giving this old truck the gas, and I was afraid to shift gears. Now, this is something that you may not believe. Now, whether I did it or whether I didn't, I don't know, but that truck was in compound. I had it in low gear, see, and I was afraid to shift to compound, afraid I'd kill my motor. And when I got up to the top, the old truck was in compound gear. And I know it was in low gear when I started up there. And this light lit up the quaking aspens just as bright as day. But boy, that was something. I still say they're not from this outfit. It was plenty big, a good-sized outfit coming right towards me.
All right, here's our last example from the 400 accounts that Junior Hicks collected. This one comes from Leland Meekum.
We looked up west and saw this big red glow with a big dome-shaped light over the top of it to the ground. It was behind Carl Richen's house, which is at least a mile away, and I would say it was half a mile past his house. It looked about 10 times bigger than his house. Down at the bottom of this glow, there were long streamers of red coming out of the bottom like sun rays. That's what it reminded me of, but they were red. And they were hitting the ground. The dust or smoke or something was boiling, just flying like that. You could see it roll way up into the air and then come back down. It would never go clear up to the object, but it was rolling way up and coming back. We watched for probably 3 or 4 minutes, and finally we decided, since there was a car coming, we better stop somebody to get somebody else to see it. So we stopped them, and they said, yeah, they'd just seen a flash of it, so we took off for home. When we got down there by the neighbors, we went behind some big cottonwoods and were blocked from view of it. When we came out, the red object was completely gone. Where it went, I don't know, but the light, the dome light, was still there, and this, whatever it was flying in the air, was still boiling up, flying and going up and settling. And it did that for quite a while. We came clear over here and through the gate and over to the house, and this light just gradually kept shrinking and coming down like mist, just shrinking to the ground. When we got up here, I got Norma, my wife. She came out of the back door, and the glow was still there, but you couldn't see this, whatever it was. It wouldn't come up high enough to see it above the hill. It's really kind of hard to explain without seeing it. I don't know. It was really something. Jody, I think it kind of scared him.
Yeah, it was kind of spooky.
The ridge north of Carl Richens would be at least 2 miles, and we could see the cedars on that ridge just like it was daylight. It is sand dunes, kind of spotted with cedars, and you could see the individual trees just as good that night as we could in the daytime. Just the red object itself was at least 10 times bigger than Richens' house, and he's got a big house. It was on the other side of his house. The rays that came out of it were just as bright red as the object itself. They were just brilliant red. The rays weren't coming straight down, but out about like this, like the sun shining down through a hole in the clouds. It looked to me like whatever was coming out of the bottom of it was a thrust, letting it down or pushing it up into the air. It reminded me of smoke at first, but if it was smoke, it would have just kept going. Whatever this was, it only came up about halfway to the object, and then it would go back down to the ground. It looked like a big cloud, only it was boiling. I figured from the height of the ridge, this side of it, probably the object itself must have been 400 to 500 feet in the air. The dirt or dust or whatever it was flying. When it went up in the air about half the distance. The dome line over the object just kept going toward the ground, getting dimmer and dimmer and smaller until it was completely gone after maybe half an hour. Everything just indicated that it set down like that. And if it had gone in the air, I don't know why this light wouldn't have gone with it. It looked like something hot that was cooling off.
With just this small sampling of reports given to Junior Hicks by his friends, neighbors, and others living in the Uinta Basin, you can see why so many TV shows focus on this part of Utah. Back in the 1990s, a very wealthy man by the name of Robert Bigelow from Las Vegas purchased a ranch between Rangulet and Fort Duchesne. Mr. Bigelow had secured a grant from the United States government to investigate the high strangeness associated with the Uinta Basin. He called his research group the National Institute of Discovery Science. Junior gave the Institute, or NIDS, group many of his reports, and they studied them. But their findings are now all classified. NIDS ceased their investigation and sold the ranch to a real estate mogul by the name of Brandon Fugel. Mr. Fugel, with the help of the History Channel, is trying to figure out what NIDS might have found that is now classified. Mr. Fugel has also brought in top scientists from all over the United States to investigate the high strangeness of the Uinta Basin. This TV show is called The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, and it airs on the History Channel. They are into their 5th season. I personally find this show extremely entertaining, and at sometimes just downright spooky. Other TV shows have done their own investigations of the Uinta Basins, like the Discovery Channel's Mystery at Blind Frog Ranch and the show Expedition X. If you are interested in learning more about Junior Hicks' report in the Uinta Basin, again, I highly recommend the book, The Utah UFO Display by Frank B. Salisbury, Ph.D. Well, that's it for tonight's episode. Remember to be safe and respectful while visiting these amazing areas of the Great Southwest, and have fun exploring. And for heaven's sakes, don't get abducted by lights in the night sky. Get out to the Uinta Basin and spend some time exploring. Even if you don't see any strange objects in the sky, there are plenty of other things to see and do in the Uinta Mountains and the basin. You can find us on the internet at undiscoveredutah.com or on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Just remember to search for Undiscovered Utah. And be sure to follow us. Just tell your friends about Undiscovered Utah. We would love for them to join the podcast also. Just tell them to search for Undiscovered Utah. Please join us next time as I share more about the Great Southwest. Good night, everybody.